So housing affordability. One of the many problems that the Northside community endures is the lack of affordable rental properties. As an elected official, how will you address the current housing crisis on the North Side and throughout the state of Minnesota? Esther, your 2 minutes will start right now.
Thank you, Elijah. Yes, this is definitely one of a very important question for our community. It's part of the reasons why I jumped into this race. Even before COVID-19, we saw that there was a housing crisis looming in Minneapolis. Rentals were tight. I think at any point there was about a 2 to 4% vacancy rate. And so for me, what's really important is that housing is actually seen and treated as a fundamental human right. We must make sure that people have a safe and affordable place to stay. We also need to make sure that, as you alluded in your question, a number of properties are rental properties and that tenants' rights are protected. So some of the things that I would really like to see done to make sure that housing is much more affordable, particularly in the rental space, is to make sure that we do have a bonding bill that goes through that helps build more housing, build more public housing, that we also work to ensure that tenants are protected. So one of the things I want to make sure is that evictions do not attach to their record at the beginning. And also working with developers and contractors to make sure that we are building buildings that are actually at 30% of a person's income, and that we're pegging that number not to a countywide AMI, but more to even a neighborhood AMI to make sure that those rates are actually at 30% or less for someone. So those are some of the major things I think that would work to start to bring down the housing prices. I think we also need to look at programs that advance home ownership and also look at innovative ways of home ownership, whether it's community ownership of a building, more co-ops, more ways that people can be involved, and that we're building mixed income neighborhoods so that way we're not concentrating levels of poverty in any one place.
Okay, thank you, Esther. All right. Next, we're going to have Lisa. I'll repeat the question. So one of the many problems that the Northside community endures is the lack of affordable rental properties. As an elected official, how will you address the current housing crisis on the North Side and throughout the state? Your 2 minutes now.
A big issue is truly affordable housing in Minneapolis is far less than the affordable housing index across Hennepin County, or the income in Hennepin County. One that needs to be addressed, because we all understand that this county is a very rich county. However, the people in North Minneapolis make just a fraction of what is of that income. So truly affordable housing needs to be affordable to the location, the zip code, and not the county overall. The second thing is we have an abundance of vacant lots in the city, particularly here in North Minneapolis, that they are starting to build new houses that aren't affordable for most people in the living in the North Minneapolis area. We also have a lot of abandoned houses that were sold, but we still have plenty more abandoned housings. They could be rehabbed. I would support bonding to rehab the abandoned houses that we have, build more houses so that we can move people towards home ownership or rental, or rent at affordable prices for the people here in the city of here in the area of North Minneapolis.
Thank you, Lisa. Alan, you're up next. The question is, one of the many problems that the Northside community endures is the lack of affordable rental properties. As an elected official, how will you address the current housing crisis on the North Side and throughout the state? I'm going to start your timer now.
Okay. First of all, I don't consider housing wherever you want a right, just like I don't think everybody has a right to, I don't know, go to Harvard or something. It's that old thing of, everyone should have transportation, but not everyone gets a Cadillac. And I think what Minneapolis government has done is, in a way, their policies have made things very expensive. I think some of the regulations, the housing regulations on the one hand, but then some very stringent enforcement have driven up the costs of housing. And you can look in other jurisdictions and you'll find that similar housing is much cheaper than it is in Minneapolis. So that's one of the things driving things up. A second thing is 20, 30 years ago, there was almost a persecution of small private landlords. Some of them were not so good, but they also were housing providers of last resort. And in fact, the city, through some of its police policies, caused some affordable housing to go down. I think it was a 12-unit building over on Golden Valley Road, where there was one unit where there was some drug dealing going on. Whenever there was a police call, that address would get logged, and it kept getting logged because of one bad actor. And when the landlord said to the cops, help me get rid of these people, they said, if we don't see it committed, we can't do anything. So it was put on the landlord to try and figure out how to enforce the drug laws. Eventually, that building was knocked down. 11 units of good residents lost their homes. And I'll tell you, you know, when people, homeowners in the neighborhood cheer affordable housing like that being knocked down, that doesn't send a good sign. And we need to go and help landlords do what they're trying to do too.
Thank you, Alan. Your time is up. And I believe that was our last candidate that answered that question. So at this point, we will move into the rebuttal round. And we can just start that. Whoever wants to talk, you have 1 minute.
Okay, I hate jumping in here, but I'm going to jump on in here and try this, Elijah. None of us I noticed talked about the homeless situation, and that is big. That's probably the most dire housing crisis here in Minneapolis, particularly as it comes to North Minneapolis. However, we have buildings out at Fort Snelling that have been standing vacant for the last 20 plus years. Those buildings could easily be updated, rehabbed, and used as temporary homeless shelters, temporary housing, so that we can get services in one location for people. It's right on a major bus line. They were already housing units. All they need to do is be updated. And like I said, at one point, I think the military had over 6,000 people there. They've been empty for 20 plus, 30 plus years now, and would be a great location that is not centered in the middle of a community. And they also have the resources nearby so that they can get those wraparound services to help these people transition.
Thank you, Lisa. Your minute expired. Thank you. Does anyone else have a rebuttal?
I think I would just actually like to respond to something Alan said about this idea that people shouldn't have a right to housing. I think it is true that people actually do have a right to housing. I think it is patently unfair that our answer as a society to people who no longer have money, and especially now in a pandemic where through many times no fault of their own, are out on the street. And as Lisa alluded to, that means that our homelessness crisis is growing. And so we need to be a state that is not afraid to take bold action and bold steps to buying up the properties that we need to, making sure that we're providing transitional and then permanent housing, and focusing on a housing first type of policy to make sure that people are in a safe, stable location, so that way they can then be able to build on themselves by making sure they can keep their jobs, keep their kids educated, and that they know they have a place to go home to at the end of the night.
Thank you. Alan, do you have a rebuttal to that? You'll have 1 minute. I think you got to unmute yourself, Alan.
Problems I had last time, I couldn't find the unmute button. Government, I think, should be sort of a referee and a setter of the rules. I don't always think it's a good provider of services. Sometimes yes, but oftentimes no. And one of the things that's worrying me with the homeless crisis is it looks as though the county's going to get into the provision of housing. They're buying a couple of places. They're talking about putting in the tiny homes or little houses in them. And I'm not so sure we want to be going down that pathway, because I don't think that it is necessarily the most efficient provider. And I think sometimes if we can find, through bidding and other things, other providers that can do a job and be efficient and less political, I think we're better off. So I really worry about that. With regards to it being a right, I don't want
Thank you,
anyone
thank you,
homeless,
Alan.
but I do think we have to make sure that we just don't guarantee more than we can satisfy.
Thank you, Alan. You're minting this up. I do want to stay on this for a couple extra minutes. I'm actually going to eliminate one of the questions that we had. I want you guys to elaborate a little bit more on this conversation. So the state of Minnesota is projected to have a $5 billion budget deficit according to the current Congressional Budget Office projections, and that's for the 2023 biennium. You all are familiar with that, correct? Can I just get a head nod? So how do you expect the state of Minnesota to provide affordable housing or subsidies if we're projected to have a $5 billion deficit? And that could be more, assuming, that those projections are based on COVID-19 ending fairly quickly here. Now, if this thing drags out for another year or so, I mean, those projections could be further exacerbated, right? So I'll allow Esther to answer the question first. I'll give you a minute, and then we'll go Lisa, and then we'll go Alan.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be like a major situation, right? But it goes back to the idea of what are we putting the money towards, the scarce resource that we have towards. So I think it's a situation where we need to be investing in things that keep people safe and things that allow people to get back on their feet, allow people to deal with this COVID crisis, and housing is one of those. So we need to make sure that we are using the scarce resources that we have in a way that's going to make sure that we're, investing in the care economy, because a lot of people are going to be needing, help to recover from COVID, making sure that there are jobs in those spaces that people can get that are living wage jobs, and then making sure that we are using those funds to support people to stay in their homes, keep the eviction moratorium in place, actually get rid of the loopholes that they had just put in place in the eviction moratorium. So that way more people can stay in their homes. And then we also provide those funding and those resources so that way landlords can make the repairs to homes that they need to, and then help cities and counties across the state of Minnesota be able to provide that transitional to permanent housing for members of our community that are out on the street. So it's going to take.
Esther.
Mhm.
That was your 1 minute. Thank you. Lisa, you have 1 minute.
I mean, because of the shortfall, because of the shortfall in the deficit, what the state of Minnesota is going to have to do is look at their other budget, look at their other funding sources, things like the legacy fund for arts and waterways and things like that. It's time that everybody's going to have to contribute to this crisis, and we're going to have to use that money, shift that money or those funds for lesser priority. And I'm not saying the arts aren't important, and I'm not saying that our waterways are not important, but we're going to have to use those funds to help fight homelessness, to have bonding grants to keep people in their homes. We can't expect landlords not to be able to evict people. They can't pay their rents if the landlords can't pay the mortgages. So once again, we're going to have to continue the funding for the housing crisis as we have right now, the eviction crisis, the moratorium on evictions, but we've also going to have to look across state.
Thank you, Lisa. That was your minute. I know that minute goes by fast, so thank you all. Alan, you have 1 minute. Start now.
Okay. I worry about letting one crisis go and overpower other types of crises. And Lisa and I both had experience going to the Gordon Center rallies where the county and the city, and actually the school board had a hand in it, wanted to put a housing shelter, temporary housing, up there in Willard Hay. And the problem was, it wasn't something that the community was consulted on or wanted. And even worse, there was a need up there for a place, a community center for youth to be at. And to go and have county priorities and federal priorities come down on a community and in effect tell them, well, you forget about being able to use this for that community center right next to a playground, because the people above us have given us a unfunded mandate in effect, just isn't right, in my opinion. We just can't go and let one crisis overpower all the others.